Rain tapped gently on the cracked windows of Millstone High as the final bell echoed down its aging halls. Students burst from classrooms, laughter mixing with the slam of lockers and the squeak of sneakers against linoleum. But in room 304, at the far end of the east wing, Evelyn Hart lingered, her fingers tracing the outline of an old baby grand piano, long forgotten and covered in a soft layer of dust. It sat beneath a flickering fluorescent light, silent and hollow like a ghost in hiding. She stood still for a moment, staring at the instrument as though it had whispered her name. It wasn't on the school's inventory anymore, she knew that. The budget cuts had slashed the arts department to its knees. Evelyn had fought to keep what she could, but this piano? This one was officially condemned. Its cracked soundboard and 3 sticky keys were enough reason for the district to declare it trash. The janitor was set to haul it out to the junk pile the next morning. Yet Evelyn didn't move. She felt something strange and nostalgic, like the echo of a forgotten song buried deep in her memory. Her hands, without thinking, lifted the heavy lid. She pressed a single key. It let out a brittle note, warped and soft, but it wasn't silence. It was still breathing. She looked around. The classroom was empty, save for the dull hum of the ceiling fan and the slow drip of a leaky pipe. She turned back to the piano, her voice low and half laughing. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" That evening, instead of going straight home, Evelyn stayed late and called in a favor. The janitor grumbled, but eventually wheeled the piano to the loading dock. She followed behind with her coat thrown over her shoulders and a determination in her step. It wasn't the first time she'd taken in something the world had given up on. Evelyn lived in a small apartment above a bookstore downtown. She paid extra for the freight elevator, which creaked in protest as the old piano made its slow ascent. By the time it reached her second-floor home, the rain had turned to mist and the streets below were quiet, wrapped in the sleepy blue of twilight. She wiped the keys clean and played a few more notes. They were clumsy and fractured, but they stirred something inside her. Music had always been more than notes and rhythm, it was breath, it was memory, it was salvation. She remembered playing through her own childhood storms, each note a lifeline when everything else felt like it was drowning. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She kept hearing the fragile voice of the piano in her mind, as if it were waiting, not to be repaired, but to be heard. The next morning, she brought coffee in a thermos and set out early for school. The rain had cleared but left behind a slick gloss on the sidewalks. The city looked softer, as if it had cried out its anger and settled into reflection. Her first class of the day was a general music elective, made up mostly of students who didn't have anywhere else to go. That's where she saw her again, Lila Monroe. The girl sat in the back row, hood up, earbuds in, scribbling in the margins of her notebook. She never volunteered. Never spoke. Always turned in her assignments, though, and they were surprisingly thoughtful, filled with handwritten notes about composition structure and melody analysis that no one else in the class could seem to grasp. Evelyn watched her during roll call, thinking back to the piano. She didn't know why, but something about the way Lila moved, the cautious way she handled her bag, the way her fingers twitched against the desk when a song played from the classroom speakers, it all reminded her of someone searching for something they weren't sure they deserved. Later that afternoon, during lunch, Evelyn approached Lila in the hallway. She didn't say much. Just handed her a slip of paper with an address and said, "Come by after school. I have something for you." Lila blinked. "Why?" Evelyn didn't answer. Just gave her a small, enigmatic smile and walked away. At 3:45, Lila stood outside the bookstore, backpack slung over one shoulder, staring up at the apartment above. The windows were slightly fogged, but she could make out the outline of something large near the middle of the room, something that looked like a piano. Evelyn opened the door before Lila could knock. "You came," she said simply, stepping aside to let her in. Lila followed her up the narrow staircase, unsure of why she was there or what exactly was happening. The apartment was small but warm. Books lined every wall. The scent of old paper mixed with freshly brewed tea. And in the center, like a sleeping giant, sat the piano. "It's broken," Evelyn said. "But not useless." Lila stared at it. "Why me?" "I don't know," Evelyn admitted. "Call it a hunch. Or maybe I just thought you might be able to hear it." Lila hesitated. She hadn't touched a real piano in over 2 years, not since her mother sold theirs for rent money. Even before that, it had been just an old keyboard missing 2 octaves and running on batteries that died every week. She stepped forward slowly, placing her hand gently on the keys. "They stick," Evelyn warned. Lila didn't respond. She sat down on the bench and pressed a few notes. They were off, slightly sharp, some muffled. But they were real. Then she played. At first, just a few tentative chords. But her fingers remembered more than her mind did. They moved like whispers, like shadows dancing across memory. And then came the melody, something soft, broken, beautiful. A piece she'd composed in her head during long nights lying awake, trying to escape the noise of the apartment walls and the emptiness of the fridge. Evelyn froze. She'd expected curiosity. Hesitation. But what poured out of Lila wasn't just music, it was story. Longing. Hope. And pain. When the final note faded, Lila sat still, her hands trembling slightly above the keys. Evelyn finally exhaled. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Lila looked down. "I don't know. I just do." Evelyn knelt beside her, eye to eye. "This piano was broken," she whispered. "Still is. But in your hands, I think it just remembered how to sing." Outside, the sun had slipped behind the rooftops, casting gold across the glass. And inside, in that small second-floor apartment above a bookstore no one ever noticed, something had changed. A teacher had given away something broken. And for the first time in a long time, someone made it whole again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The morning light filtered through gauzy curtains, casting streaks of pale gold across Evelyn Hart's living room floor. The apartment, still carrying the warmth from last night's moment of unexpected beauty, was quiet except for the soft ticking of a wall clock and the hum of a kettle preparing to boil. Evelyn sat in her armchair across from the piano, eyes fixed on it as though it might vanish if she looked away. She hadn't expected Lila to play like that, hell, she hadn't expected her to show up at all. There was something uncanny about the way the girl's fingers danced over the keys. Not just precision. Not just skill. It was emotion, raw and unfiltered. Music as memory, as language. Evelyn had only seen that kind of playing once before, and it hadn't been in any classroom. It had been in herself. Her gaze drifted to the corner of the room where an old photo sat in a weathered frame. It was faded now, edges curling slightly with time. A teenage Evelyn, maybe 16, sat on the steps of a music hall, clutching a first-place ribbon with both hands. Her mother, all high cheekbones and cigarette smoke, stood a few feet behind her, not smiling but present. That had been rare. Evelyn leaned back, eyes heavy with memory. She remembered the first time she ever touched a piano. She was 9, maybe 10, tucked into the back of a church where her grandmother used to clean on Sundays. While her grandmother scrubbed pews and dusted hymnals, Evelyn had found the organ tucked beneath the choir loft. She hadn't known what it was at first, just saw the keys, rows of them, black and white like teeth, waiting. She pressed one. Then another. The sound it made wasn't beautiful, it was worn, distant, but it spoke to her. She'd returned every week, sneaking moments while no one watched, mimicking the hymns she heard and eventually creating tunes of her own. It was her only secret. Her only sanctuary. Her mother, when she finally found out, wasn't impressed. "Music won't feed you," she had said flatly. You want to waste time on those keys, do it after your homework. And don't expect a dime from me. But Evelyn kept playing. When she was 15, a music teacher at her public high school noticed her practicing during lunch and offered private lessons after school, for free. That woman, Mrs. Cadwell, had changed everything. She believed in Evelyn before Evelyn even understood what that meant. She taught her theory, composition, and most importantly, how to tell the truth through music. But then came the competition. Evelyn had won first place at a regional youth concert in Chicago. She was offered a spot in a summer program at Juilliard. It was everything she'd worked for, everything she'd dreamed about. She came home with the acceptance letter in hand, only to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table, eyes red, bills spread like war plans across the surface. "We're 3 months behind," her mother had said. "Rent's due. Utilities are overdue. You think we got money to send you off to New York to play piano for rich people?" Evelyn had fought. Pleaded. She even offered to work part-time, to get scholarships. But it wasn't enough. That summer, she didn't go to Juilliard. She got a job at the diner on 4th and Main, and the dream began to fade like an old melody you can't remember how to finish. But not entirely. She studied music education at a local college, tutored kids after class, and worked her way into a teaching credential. It wasn't the spotlight, but it was music. And it was something. She looked now at her hands, slightly stiffer than they used to be, nails trimmed short, fingertips no longer calloused from nightly practice. She had chosen a life of teaching instead of performing. At times, it felt like settling. But other times, like last night, it felt like a second chance. There was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Lila standing there again, hands in the pockets of an oversized hoodie, backpack slung low on one shoulder. "I was early for school," Lila said, then looked down. "I just didn't want to wait." Evelyn stepped aside. "Come in." The girl's eyes scanned the room again, this time with more familiarity. She looked at the piano, almost shyly, then sat at the bench without waiting for permission. Her fingers hovered for a moment before she began to play. Not the same piece as yesterday, something new, slower, more hesitant, like a question wrapped in melody. When she finished, Evelyn spoke quietly. "Where did you learn?" Lila shrugged. "Nowhere, really. My mom had this keyboard when I was little. She used to play songs from her old band. I'd mess around with it. I started hearing music in my head, making stuff up. After we had to sell it, I just remembered things. Played them in my mind." Evelyn sat beside her. "You have perfect pitch." Lila blinked. What? You can hear a note and reproduce it exactly. That's rare. You don't just remember songs, Lila. You understand them." Lila looked down. "It doesn't matter. My mom says music won't pay the bills. That I should focus on something real." Evelyn's heart ached at the echo. The words had changed slightly, but the sentiment was the same. How many voices had told girls like them that what they loved wasn't practical, wasn't enough? "You know," Evelyn said, "this piano. It was headed for the dumpster. No one thought it was worth saving." Lila smiled faintly. "Kind of like me." Evelyn turned toward her. "You're worth more than any piano. And I'm not going to let your gift get thrown away just because the world doesn't know how to see it." They sat there for a while longer, the air between them filling with unspoken things, fear, hope, recognition. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang 9 times. "School's starting soon," Evelyn said. Lila stood, but not before running her fingers along the piano's keys one last time. "Can I come back later?" Evelyn nodded. "Anytime." As the girl left, Evelyn closed the door behind her and pressed her back to it, breath catching in her chest. There was something bigger happening here, something she didn't fully understand yet. But it felt like a door she hadn't realized she'd closed was cracking open again. Maybe this was her second chance after all. Or maybe, just maybe, it was Lila's first. The following week at Millstone High was a whirlwind of whispered rumors and sideways glances. Word spread quickly, as it always does, that Evelyn Hart, the music teacher who had quietly weathered years of budget cuts and indifference, had taken in a broken piano and was teaching someone unexpected to play it. That someone was Lila Monroe, the quiet girl with a reputation for staying in the shadows and never asking for help. In the crowded, fluorescent-lit teacher's lounge, Evelyn sat with a cup of lukewarm coffee, her mind tangled with worry. Between the chatter about upcoming standardized tests and the politics of the school board, she couldn't ignore the unease growing inside her. She'd seen it before, how the administration viewed the arts as a luxury rather than a necessity, how the students like Lila were often overlooked, their talents dismissed as distractions. Her phone buzzed, a text from Principal Harris. "Need to see you. ASAP." Her stomach tightened. The office was cold and stark, the walls decorated with plaques praising academic achievements. Principal Harris, a man in his 50s with thinning hair and a perpetual frown, didn't bother with small talk. "Evelyn, I've been hearing from several staff members about your extracurricular activities with that piano and the new student." Evelyn straightened. "Lila is talented. That piano may be broken, but she deserves a chance." Harris's eyes narrowed. "The school's resources are stretched thin. Bringing in personal equipment, spending extra time after school, it raises concerns about fairness and liability. Plus, Lila's attendance record isn't exactly exemplary." "She's coming around," Evelyn argued gently. "You've seen her work. She's motivated. And that piano, it's not just an instrument. It's a symbol." Harris shook his head. "I respect your dedication, but I need to remind you to stay within the boundaries of your contract. The district is watching." Evelyn left the office feeling a mix of frustration and resolve. The battle wasn't just about a piano or a student, it was about what kind of future the school wanted to offer. Was it one that crushed dreams under the weight of bureaucracy? Or one that nurtured hope where it could be found? Back in class, Lila sat quietly as Evelyn introduced the basics of music theory, watching her closely. The girl's fingers itched to reach the piano again, but Evelyn knew better than to push too hard too fast. Progress was slow and fragile. One afternoon, after the last bell, Evelyn found Lila sitting alone by the old piano, tears quietly tracing lines down her cheeks. She approached gently, sitting beside her. "What's wrong?" Evelyn asked softly. Lila wiped her face. "My mom's been sick. I had to miss school yesterday to take care of her. I'm falling behind." Evelyn's heart clenched. "Do you want help? We can work through it together." Lila nodded, hesitant but hopeful. That evening, Evelyn stayed late, preparing lesson plans that could be tailored for Lila's unpredictable schedule. She wanted to make sure music remained a constant in the girl's life, a beacon when everything else felt uncertain. Outside, the city lights twinkled through the rain-soaked streets, mirroring the fragile flicker of hope growing between teacher and student. But as shadows lengthened, Evelyn knew this was only the beginning of a long, difficult journey. The days that followed unfolded like a delicate symphony, sometimes harmonious, sometimes discordant, but always moving forward. Evelyn and Lila settled into a rhythm that defied the chaos around them. After school, the small apartment above the bookstore became their sanctuary. The broken piano stood at the center of the room, its worn keys a map of scars and stories. Lila's fingers traced these scars, coaxing out fragile melodies that had once been silenced. It was during one of these late afternoon sessions that Evelyn noticed something she hadn't before, the way Lila's eyes would light up when a particular piece came alive under her hands, the subtle shift in her posture when the music touched a place deep inside. She saw flashes of the girl's true potential beneath the quiet exterior. One chilly Friday evening, as the wind rattled the windows and the city's nightlife pulsed faintly below, Evelyn offered Lila an unexpected proposition. "There's a local music festival next month," she said, her voice tentative but hopeful. "It's small, but it could be a chance for you to play in front of an audience." Lila looked up sharply, uncertainty clouding her face. "Me? Play in front of people? I don't know if I'm ready." Evelyn smiled gently. "You don't have to be perfect. Just you, sharing what you create. I think it could change everything." The thought of stepping outside the safety of their sessions both terrified and excited Lila. But beneath the surface, something stirred, a quiet yearning to be seen, to be heard beyond the shadows she'd long inhabited. In the weeks leading up to the festival, their lessons took on a new urgency. The piano, despite its flaws, seemed to respond to their growing determination. The sticky keys loosened, the brittle soundboard vibrated with newfound resonance, and the apartment filled with music that was no longer just survival, but expression. Meanwhile, at school, tension simmered beneath the surface. Principal Harris's warnings grew more frequent, his veiled threats about budget cuts and program cancellations a constant reminder of the fragile ground they stood on. Yet Evelyn refused to back down. She believed in Lila, and in the power of music to heal wounds invisible to most. One afternoon, as rain poured relentlessly against the windows, Evelyn found herself caught in a moment of reflection. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a girl who once dreamed of stages and spotlights, to a teacher nurturing the fragile spark in someone else. It wasn't the path she'd imagined, but perhaps it was exactly where she needed to be. The night before the festival, Lila sat at the piano, fingers hovering nervously above the keys. Evelyn watched, heart pounding with pride and anticipation. "No matter what happens tomorrow, remember, this music is yours. It's your story." Lila took a deep breath, nodded, and began to play. Outside, the city held its breath. Inside, a broken piano sang again. The music festival was held in a small, aging community center on the edge of Millstone. The air inside was thick with the mingled scents of old wood, fresh paint, and nervous excitement. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, facing a modest stage bathed in soft amber light. The audience was a patchwork of familiar faces, local families, teachers, and a handful of curious neighbors. It was far from the grand concert halls Evelyn had once dreamed of, but tonight, it felt like the world itself had shrunk to this single, precious moment. Backstage, Lila sat on a wooden bench, hands trembling in her lap as she stared at the worn music sheets Evelyn had helped her prepare. The notes were neat, but the silence around her was deafening. She felt 1,000 eyes watching, waiting for her to perform, and her heart thundered with fear and hope tangled together. Evelyn knelt beside her, voice steady and calm. "You're ready. Just remember, this isn't about perfection. It's about telling your story." Lila nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She stood and stepped onto the stage, the old floor creaking beneath her feet. As she faced the audience, the weight of years of doubt, loneliness, and silence pressed down, threatening to drown her. But then she saw Evelyn in the front row, a steady smile, a beacon of faith, and something within her shifted. Her fingers touched the keys, tentative at first, then more sure. The piano, despite its age and scars, responded with a warm, imperfect voice. Notes blossomed into melodies, melodies into stories. She played not just with skill, but with raw emotion, joy, sorrow, hope, and defiance all woven into the music. Halfway through, a jarring note struck, a stiff key sticking, threatening to unravel her concentration. The room held its breath. Lila faltered but didn't stop. Instead, she adapted, letting the flaw become part of the music, a unique signature of her journey. The audience was captivated by the vulnerability and power of her performance. When the last note faded into silence, the room erupted in applause. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She had never been prouder. After the show, as people approached to congratulate her, Lila felt something new, a sense of belonging. Among the well-wishers was a man in a crisp suit, who introduced himself as a representative from a local arts foundation. He expressed interest in supporting her continued education, offering scholarships and opportunities that Lila had only dreamed of. But amid the celebration, a darker moment loomed. Principal Harris appeared in the crowd, his expression unreadable. Later, Evelyn received an email, a formal complaint questioning the use of school resources for extracurricular activities, hinting at possible repercussions. The clash between hope and reality was sharper than ever. Evelyn realized that to protect Lila's future, she would have to fight harder than she ever had before. But for that night, at least, the music had triumphed. As Lila lay in bed that night, the piano's melody still echoing in her mind, she understood that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where courage and resilience would be her guides, and where the broken piano had become the instrument of her voice. The weeks that followed the festival were a whirlwind of emotion and challenges. The small victory that Lila had won with her music had opened a door, but it also revealed the obstacles that lay beyond. Evelyn spent countless hours drafting letters to the school board, advocating for funding and support for arts programs, while Lila juggled schoolwork, her mother's health, and the overwhelming attention from the community. Their bond deepened with every late-night practice and whispered conversation, each finding strength in the other's determination. Despite the mounting pressure from the administration and the skepticism of some colleagues, Evelyn refused to back down. She saw in Lila a reflection of her younger self, a girl with dreams too big for the small world she had been given. Lila, once withdrawn and uncertain, began to carry herself with a quiet confidence that surprised even her. Music had become more than notes and rhythms, it was a lifeline, a voice, a promise. One afternoon, as spring light spilled through the classroom windows, Evelyn and Lila sat together at the piano. The instrument, once broken and forgotten, now sang with a gentle richness that spoke of healing and hope. Lila's fingers moved effortlessly, weaving melodies that told stories of struggle and triumph. Evelyn watched her, heart full, knowing that this moment was the culmination of pain, sacrifice, and unwavering belief. The fight with the school board eventually softened. Community members rallied behind Evelyn's cause, inspired by Lila's performance and story. The district agreed to allocate funds to repair the music room and purchase new instruments, acknowledging the vital role of arts in education. It wasn't a grand victory, but it was enough to keep the dream alive. For Lila, the journey was only beginning. The scholarship offers blossomed, providing opportunities she had never dared imagine. Yet she remained grounded, aware of the fragility of her path. The piano in Evelyn's apartment was no longer just an old instrument, it was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of hope. As spring turned to summer, Evelyn reflected on the twists and turns of her own life. The dreams she had set aside, the hardships endured, and the unexpected gift of mentoring a girl who reminded her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. In guiding Lila, Evelyn had rediscovered her own purpose and the profound impact one person could have on another. One evening, as they closed the piano lid together, Lila looked up and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me when no one else did." Evelyn smiled back, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fading daylight. "Music brought us together," she replied. "And it will carry you far, Lila. Just remember to keep playing your truth." Outside, the city hummed with life, full of stories yet to be told. Inside that small apartment, two souls connected by music had found something rare and beautiful, hope renewed and dreams reclaimed. The broken piano was no longer a relic of what was lost but a beacon of what could be. Their journey had come full circle, not with a grand finale, but with the quiet understanding that sometimes, the most meaningful victories are the ones we carry in our hearts. The summer sun streamed through the dusty windows of Evelyn's small apartment, warming the worn wood of the broken piano that had become a centerpiece of their lives. Lila sat quietly, her fingers poised above the keys, hesitating as if waiting for the perfect moment to unleash the music she had been practicing so hard to master. The days following the music festival had brought new opportunities, but also fresh challenges that neither Evelyn nor Lila could have anticipated. The scholarship offers that had arrived like a gentle tide promising brighter horizons were accompanied by the reality of increased expectations, more demanding schedules, and a world that was less forgiving than the cocoon they'd built around their music. Evelyn watched as Lila wrestled with this growing pressure, her usually calm demeanor giving way to moments of frustration and doubt. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed," Evelyn reassured her one afternoon as the girl's shoulders slumped in exhaustion. "This journey isn't just about talent, it's about patience, perseverance, and sometimes learning to ask for help." Lila looked up, her eyes glistening with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "I'm scared I'll let everyone down," she whispered. Evelyn reached out, squeezing her hand gently. "You won't. Remember, no one expects perfection. Just honesty." Meanwhile, the school year was creeping closer, and with it came the subtle return of tensions that had simmered beneath the surface. The administration's earlier warnings hadn't disappeared, instead, they had morphed into a quiet vigilance, scrutinizing every decision Evelyn made regarding the music program. But what surprised Evelyn most was the appearance of unexpected allies. Some teachers, moved by Lila's story and Evelyn's relentless dedication, began to offer quiet support. Mr. Thompson, the gruff but kind-hearted history teacher, stopped by after school one day with a stack of old music books he'd found in the school library's forgotten corners. "Thought these might help," he said gruffly, trying to hide a smile. It was a small gesture, but for Evelyn and Lila, it felt like a lifeline. Then there was Sarah, a senior student with a passion for photography, who volunteered to document Lila's journey, hoping to raise awareness about the importance of arts education. These connections stitched together a fragile network of support, reminding Evelyn that even in the face of adversity, community could flourish. Yet the biggest challenge was still Lila's home life. Her mother's health had taken a sudden downturn, forcing Lila to juggle hospital visits and caretaking duties alongside her burgeoning music commitments. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her young shoulders. One evening, after a long day of school and practice, Lila collapsed onto the couch, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Evelyn sat beside her, pulling her into a comforting embrace. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said softly. "We'll figure it out, together." The promise of solidarity rekindled a spark of hope in Lila's weary heart. As summer began to wane, Evelyn proposed a plan, a benefit concert to raise funds for both Lila's family and the school's music program. It was ambitious and risky, but also filled with possibility. They reached out to local businesses, fellow teachers, and community leaders. Slowly, the pieces fell into place. The night of the concert arrived with a nervous energy that vibrated through the small auditorium. Lila took the stage, her hands steady despite the storm raging inside her. She played with a depth of emotion that transcended technique, her music a testament to resilience and love. The audience was moved to tears, their applause thunderous and heartfelt. By the end of the night, the fundraiser had surpassed all expectations, providing much-needed support for Lila's mother's medical bills and breathing new life into the school's music department. In the quiet aftermath, Evelyn and Lila sat side by side, the broken piano between them now a symbol of triumph over adversity. The journey ahead was still uncertain, filled with obstacles and unknowns, but together, they had proven that with courage, faith, and a little help from unexpected friends, even the most fragile dreams could find their way to light. The crisp autumn air had settled over Millstone, painting the city in warm hues of gold and amber, as school resumed with its usual hustle and bustle. The rhythm of daily life resumed, but for Lila and Evelyn, the pace had shifted. Faster, more intense, yet filled with a new sense of purpose. Lila balanced her classes, music lessons, and the delicate care of her mother with a resilience that surprised even herself. She found solace in the piano, where the outside world could fall away, and she could speak through melodies that transcended words. Evelyn, too, found herself energized by the small victories and growing community support. The music program was gaining recognition, and the repaired piano in the school's music room was finally ready for use. Yet beneath the surface of progress, there was an undercurrent of tension, a reminder that nothing was guaranteed. The budget discussion still loomed, and not all faculty members shared Evelyn's passion for the arts. One rainy afternoon, as the school emptied out, Evelyn lingered in the music room, organizing sheet music and preparing lesson plans. A soft knock at the door startled her. It was Mr. Thompson, the history teacher, holding a dusty box of old documents. "Thought you might want to see this," he said, setting the box down. Curious, Evelyn opened it to find faded photographs, letters, and a handwritten journal belonging to a former music teacher from decades ago. As she flipped through the fragile pages, she discovered stories of students who had overcome hardship through music, much like Lila. There were notes about a special recital that had once united the community, a tradition that had since faded into memory. Inspired, Evelyn shared the find with Lila the next day. Together, they pored over the journal, imagining the lives of those students and the power music had held in their stories. It sparked an idea, a revival of that old recital, a chance to reconnect the school with its history and to showcase the talents of current students. Lila's eyes brightened at the thought of being part of something larger than herself, a thread in a tapestry of resilience and hope. Meanwhile, life at home presented new challenges. Lila's mother's condition fluctuated unpredictably, and the emotional toll was heavy. Lila often arrived at school exhausted, but her determination never waned. Evelyn did her best to offer support, sometimes lending a listening ear late into the evenings, sometimes simply sitting in quiet solidarity. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Lila confided in Evelyn about her fears: fear of failing her mother, fear of losing the music that had become her lifeline, fear of the future. Evelyn listened carefully, her heart aching with empathy. "Fear is part of the journey," she said softly. "But it doesn't define you. Your music is your strength, and so am I." With renewed determination, they began planning the recital. Flyers were designed, invitations sent, and rehearsals scheduled. The excitement in the school was palpable. Students who had once ignored the music room now peeked inside, curious and eager. On the day of the recital, the auditorium was filled with faces both familiar and new. The stage was modest, but the energy was electric. Lila performed with a maturity and passion that moved the audience deeply. Her music told a story of struggle and hope, of brokenness and healing. As the final notes echoed, Evelyn looked out at the crowd: teachers, parents, students, community members, all united by the power of music. It was a moment of triumph, a bridge between past and present, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. After the recital, a woman approached Evelyn. She introduced herself as a retired music professor who had once taught at the local college. She praised Lila's talent and offered to mentor her, opening doors to opportunities Evelyn hadn't dared to dream of. That night, as Lila sat at the piano in Evelyn's apartment, she felt a quiet certainty settle within her. The broken piano, once a symbol of limitation, had become a vessel of possibility. Their journey was far from over, but they were no longer alone. The city outside buzzed with life, and inside, two hearts connected by music looked toward a future filled with hope, discovery, and the promise of dreams unfolding. The crisp chill of early winter settled over Millstone, and with it came a feeling of anticipation that seemed to pulse through the city streets and into the very heart of Evelyn and Lila's lives. The music program, once fragile and barely noticed, had begun to take on a life of its own, buoyed by the recent recital and the growing support from unexpected corners. Yet despite the external progress, inside Lila's world, uncertainty gnawed at her. The offer of mentorship from the retired professor was a beacon of hope but also a daunting challenge. It represented a leap into a new world, one filled with unfamiliar faces, higher expectations, and a demanding schedule. Every evening after school, Evelyn watched as Lila wrestled with the decision, torn between her responsibilities at home and the possibility of something greater. One night, sitting by the flickering light of the small kitchen lamp, Lila spoke quietly. "What if I'm not ready? What if I'm just pretending I belong?" Evelyn reached across the table, steadying her daughter's trembling hand. "You are more ready than you think. Growth always feels uncomfortable at first, but the only way forward is to take that leap. With Evelyn's encouragement, Lila accepted the mentorship, beginning a series of intensive lessons with the professor who brought a rigor and discipline unlike anything Lila had known. The professor's studio was a sanctuary filled with antique instruments, stacks of sheet music, and portraits of musical greats that seemed to watch over every note played within those walls. The sessions were grueling. Lila's fingers ached, her mind raced with new techniques and theories, and the pressure to perform flawlessly loomed over every practice. Yet beneath the struggle, something extraordinary began to blossom. She was no longer just playing to survive, she was beginning to understand the language of music, its nuances, its power to convey the inexpressible. Evelyn, watching from the sidelines, saw the transformation with a mix of pride and concern. She knew the path ahead was steep and that Lila's fragile balance could easily tip. At home, the situation remained fragile. Lila's mother's health continued to be unpredictable, sometimes requiring hospital stays and exhausting care. The emotional toll was heavy, and there were moments when Lila felt crushed beneath the weight of responsibility and expectation. But in those darkest hours, the music offered a lifeline, a sanctuary where she could express her fears, hopes, and dreams without words. One evening, after a particularly demanding day, Lila arrived late to a lesson, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The professor paused, studying her intently. "Why do you play, Lila?" he asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "Because it keeps me going. It's the one thing I can control." The professor nodded, a rare softness in his eyes. "Then play with that. Let your struggles give your music its soul." Encouraged, Lila poured her heart into her practice that night, the notes carrying a raw honesty that stunned even herself. As the winter deepened, so did Lila's commitment. She began performing at small local venues, her reputation growing. Invitations came for student competitions and workshops. Each opportunity was a test of her resilience and passion. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued her advocacy at the school, fighting to secure funding and protect the program from bureaucratic cuts. The battle was exhausting, but every small victory reinforced her resolve. One cold evening, as they sat together after a successful recital at a community center, Lila looked at Evelyn and said, "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't." Evelyn smiled, her eyes shining. "And thank you for showing me what hope looks like." They sat in companionable silence, the broken piano resting nearby, its keys worn but alive. The journey was far from over, but in that moment, they both understood something profound, that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. Outside, the city was cloaked in snow, but inside, two souls connected by music and hope were warm with the promise of tomorrow. Winter's grip tightened over Millstone, blanketing the city in snow and silencing the usual hum of daily life. Inside Evelyn's apartment, however, warmth pulsed through the air, fueled by music and quiet determination. The broken piano, once an emblem of hardship, now carried melodies that told stories of courage, loss, and hope. Yet beneath the surface of progress, shadows lingered, fears that threatened to unravel everything Lila and Evelyn had fought for. Lila's days became a balancing act between school, intense music lessons, and the unrelenting demands of her mother's health. Hospital visits had increased, and the uncertainty weighed heavily on her spirit. Some nights, exhaustion overtook her completely, and she would find herself staring at the ceiling, questioning if she could carry on. Evelyn noticed the cracks forming beneath Lila's brave exterior and struggled to find the right words to comfort her. One evening, after a particularly long day, Lila collapsed onto the couch, tears silently tracing paths down her cheeks. Evelyn sat beside her, pulling her close. "It's okay to be scared," she whispered. "We don't have to face this alone." For the first time, Lila allowed herself to be vulnerable, sharing fears she'd locked away, fear of losing her mother, fear of failing those who believed in her, fear that her music might never be enough. Their conversation stretched late into the night, a lifeline woven from shared pain and hope. At school, tension simmered. The administration's scrutiny on the music program intensified, budgets tightened, and whispers of cuts loomed ominously. Evelyn found herself navigating a maze of politics and indifference, often feeling isolated. Yet, the community support that had blossomed earlier in the year remained a beacon. Teachers like Mr. Thompson and students like Sarah continued their quiet but steadfast advocacy. Sarah's photography project chronicling Lila's journey gained local attention, drawing more eyes to the importance of arts education. One afternoon, Evelyn received an unexpected email from a foundation dedicated to supporting music programs in underserved communities. They were interested in funding a pilot project for Millstone's school district. It was an opportunity that could change everything, but applying for the grant meant hours of work and careful planning, work Evelyn could barely manage alongside teaching and supporting Lila. Meanwhile, Lila's relationship with her mentor deepened. The professor challenged her to explore not just technical mastery but emotional storytelling through music. Each lesson peeled back layers of self-doubt and fear, revealing a young artist emerging from the shadows. Yet, with every step forward, the pressure mounted. Competitions, recitals, and workshops filled her calendar, and the demands of her home life never ceased. There were days when she questioned if the sacrifices were worth it. One particularly cold morning, as snow fell silently outside, Lila arrived late to her lesson, her spirit visibly drained. The professor, usually stern and unyielding, softened. "Music is not just about perfection," he said. "It is about truth. You must find your truth before you can share it." Those words lingered with Lila, guiding her through a difficult winter of self-discovery. At home, Evelyn and Lila found moments of solace in music, though the silence between notes often spoke louder than the melodies. They navigated the complexities of love, responsibility, and the fear of losing what little stability they had. Evelyn's past, once a distant shadow, seemed to surface more frequently in her thoughts, the sacrifices she'd made, the dreams she'd set aside, and the unexpected gift of mentoring Lila that had rekindled a flame she thought was extinguished. One evening, after a community meeting where Evelyn presented the grant proposal, she returned home to find Lila sitting at the piano, playing a haunting piece filled with both sorrow and hope. The music was raw and unpolished but powerful, a reflection of their shared journey. Evelyn listened, tears in her eyes, knowing that despite the hardships, Lila was finding her voice. As the last note faded, they embraced, a silent promise to face whatever came next, together. Outside, the city was quiet beneath the winter sky, but inside, a story of resilience and courage continued to unfold, a story where shadows were met with light and music was both refuge and revolution. The first signs of spring teased Millstone with the soft promise of renewal, yet inside Evelyn's apartment, the tension remained palpable. Lila's world felt increasingly like a tightrope stretched over a chasm, where one misstep might send her tumbling. The demands of her mother's health persisted, the music lessons grew more rigorous, and the mounting pressure from school administrators cast a long shadow over their progress. Despite these challenges, something deeper was stirring within Lila. It was as if the struggles, the tears, and the long nights of practice were forging a strength that hadn't been there before. Her fingers moved with newfound confidence across the piano keys, her performances taking on an emotional depth that left audiences breathless. But even with this growth, a profound silence lingered within her, a silence shaped by the fears she had yet to voice, the dreams she had yet to claim. Evelyn sensed this quiet turmoil and tried to bridge the distance between them. One afternoon, as the light filtered softly through the kitchen window, she invited Lila to talk, hoping to unlock the walls her student had built. Lila hesitated, then slowly began to speak. She shared her fear that no matter how hard she tried, she would never escape the weight of her circumstances. The music felt like both a refuge and a cage. "I want to soar," she admitted, "but sometimes it feels like I'm stuck in silence." Evelyn reached out, her hand steady and warm. "Silence can be the beginning, not the end," she said gently. "It's where you find your true voice." Encouraged, Lila began to explore her music in new ways, experimenting with composition and improvisation. She started writing small pieces inspired by her experiences, notes that captured sorrow, hope, frustration, and love. Evelyn watched with pride as her students' artistry blossomed beyond mere technique into genuine expression. Meanwhile, Evelyn's advocacy for the music program intensified. The grant proposal she had submitted gained momentum, drawing interest from community leaders and local businesses. The fragile thread holding the program together was strengthening, thanks to a growing network of supporters who believed in the power of music to transform lives. One day, as Evelyn returned from a meeting, she found a package on her doorstep. Inside was an invitation to a prestigious youth music competition in a neighboring city, accompanied by a personal note from the retired professor encouraging Lila to enter. The invitation felt like a turning point, an opportunity to step onto a larger stage, to be seen and heard beyond the walls of Millstone. The decision to participate was not easy. Lila grappled with doubt and the logistics of travel, her mother's health a constant concern. But with Evelyn's unwavering support, she resolved to take the leap. The preparations were intense. Every practice session was charged with purpose and urgency. The broken piano, once a symbol of limitation, now echoed with the promise of possibility. The day of the competition arrived with a swirl of nerves and excitement. The grand concert hall was unlike anything Lila had experienced, its vastness intimidating, its silence deafening. Yet, as she sat before the piano, the first notes flowed naturally, carrying the weight of her journey and the hopes of everyone who had believed in her. Her performance was met with thunderous applause and tears from the audience, a testament to the power of music to break through silence and touch hearts. Backstage, the retired professor smiled knowingly, his eyes reflecting pride and hope. Lila had not only played notes, she had told a story of resilience, courage, and the unyielding spirit of a girl who refused to be silenced. When Evelyn hugged Lila later that evening, the warmth of the moment washed away months of fear and uncertainty. Together, they had crossed a threshold. The road ahead remained uncertain, but in that shared embrace, they found strength to face whatever challenges awaited. As the city lights twinkled outside their window, Evelyn and Lila sat quietly, the broken piano resting nearby like an old friend. The music had not only saved them, it had transformed them, opening doors to a future where silence was no longer a barrier but a bridge. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Spring in Millstone had blossomed fully now, with sunlight filtering through budding trees and a gentle warmth settling into the air. Yet inside Evelyn's modest apartment, the atmosphere was charged with a different kind of energy, a mixture of hope, anxiety, and the heavy weight of expectation that came with newfound opportunities. After the success of the competition, everything seemed to accelerate for Lila, but with every step forward came pressures that threatened to overwhelm her. The invitation to the youth music competition had opened doors, but it also set a new standard. Teachers, neighbors, and even strangers now watched her with high hopes, whispering about her potential and the future that lay ahead. Lila felt as though she were carrying not only her dreams but the dreams of her community on her shoulders. This invisible burden tightened around her chest, making each breath more difficult to take. Evelyn noticed the subtle changes, Lila's restless nights, the moments when her eyes darted nervously during practice, and the growing silence between them when words would have been the greatest comfort. Despite the pride she felt, Evelyn worried that her daughter was losing herself in the quest for perfection, that the joy of music was slipping through her fingers like sand. One evening, after a particularly grueling rehearsal, Lila collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion etched into her every movement. "I'm scared, Mom," she confessed, voice trembling. "What if I fail? What if I'm not as good as everyone thinks? What if I let you down?" Evelyn sat beside her, her own heart aching. "Lila, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you. Your music is your story, it doesn't have to please anyone else but you." But even as she said the words, she knew it would take more than reassurance to ease the storm inside her daughter. The pressure at school also mounted. The music program's growing reputation had attracted attention, but not all of it was positive. Some teachers saw the focus on music as a distraction from academics, others were skeptical of the resources being allocated. Evelyn found herself in a battle not just for funding but for respect, defending the program's value with fierce determination. At the same time, Lila's mother's health remained fragile. Hospital visits were more frequent, and the uncertainty gnawed at their daily lives. Lila juggled her responsibilities with an exhaustion that seemed impossible to shake, yet she pushed forward, afraid to show weakness. In the quiet moments, Evelyn reflected on her own past, the sacrifices she had made, the dreams she had set aside when life demanded too much. She saw herself in Lila, the same fierce determination shadowed by doubt. It was a reminder of how fragile hope could be, and how vital it was to nurture it gently. One afternoon, Evelyn surprised Lila with a small gift, a leather-bound journal. "Write your story," she said softly. "Not the story others expect, but your own. When the weight feels too heavy, come back to it." Lila accepted the gift with a tentative smile, the promise of a safe place to unload her fears a small comfort. As spring gave way to early summer, preparations began for another important event, a regional showcase that could open doors to scholarships and professional opportunities. The stakes felt higher than ever. Lila threw herself into practice, her music now infused with both vulnerability and strength. Yet beneath the surface, the tension simmered, threatening to boil over. The night before the showcase, Evelyn found Lila sitting at the piano, her fingers tracing the worn keys but no sound emerging. "I don't know if I can do this," Lila admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn knelt beside her, taking her hands in hers. "You've come so far, not because you're perfect, but because you're brave enough to keep going. Remember why you started. Remember the music that saved you." That night, as Millstone slept beneath a sky full of stars, mother and daughter found strength in each other's presence, ready to face whatever the future held. The night before the regional showcase was quiet except for the soft ticking of the old clock on the wall. Lila sat at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, but no music came. The room was filled with shadows and silence, a sharp contrast to the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. She felt the weight of everything, the competition, the expectations, her mother's fragile health, and the persistent fear that maybe she wasn't strong enough to carry it all. The piano, once a broken instrument that had been her only solace, now seemed like an altar where her fears and hopes converged. Evelyn stood nearby, watching her daughter wrestle with the invisible battle. She understood that this was more than just about music, it was about Lila's courage to face a world that had never been kind to her. "Lila," Evelyn said softly, moving closer. "You don't have to carry this alone. We've come so far together, and no matter what happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you." Lila's eyes met her mother's, a mixture of vulnerability and determination shining through. "I just want to be enough. For you, for Mom, for everyone who believes in me." Evelyn smiled gently, brushing a stray lock of hair behind Lila's ear. "You are enough. You always have been." The hours passed slowly, and sleep came in fits and starts. When morning finally arrived, the city was blanketed in soft sunlight, casting a golden glow over Millstone streets. At the venue, the grand hall buzzed with activity, young musicians rehearsing, parents and teachers bustling about, the air thick with anticipation and nerves. Lila's heart pounded as she prepared backstage, clutching the worn journal Evelyn had given her. It was a reminder of the journey she'd taken, of every challenge faced and every note played in defiance of doubt. As her name was called, Lila stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. She sat at the piano, the familiar weight of the keys beneath her fingers grounding her in the moment. Taking a deep breath, she began to play. The music was not perfect, there were moments where her fingers faltered, where the emotion spilled raw and unfiltered, but it was honest. Every note told a story of struggle and hope, of nights spent in worry and days filled with relentless practice. The audience was silent, drawn in by the authenticity of her performance. When the final note lingered and faded, the room erupted in applause, but more than that, Lila felt a quiet victory inside herself. After the showcase, the results came in slowly. Lila had not won the top prize, but she had earned a special recognition for artistic expression, a testament to the depth and emotion she poured into her music. Though part of her wished for more, Evelyn saw something greater in the moment. "You've broken through silence," she said, pulling Lila into a hug. "That's more important than any trophy." The journey was far from over, but this milestone marked a turning point. The broken piano, the struggles, the nights of doubt, they were no longer obstacles but stepping stones. Back home, life continued to challenge them. Lila's mother's condition fluctuated, and the uncertainty never fully eased. Yet, amidst the chaos, music became a constant thread, weaving strength and connection between them. Lila began sharing her compositions with her school community, inspiring others who faced their own battles. The music program gained new supporters, and Evelyn's tireless advocacy started to bear fruit with additional funding secured. One afternoon, as Lila walked home from school, she encountered a group of younger students gathered around a piano in the community center. Their eyes widened as she approached, some timidly asking for lessons. For the first time, Lila saw herself not just as a student, but as a mentor, someone who could pass on the gift that had changed her life. She smiled, realizing that her music was no longer just about survival, it was about giving others a voice. That evening, Evelyn and Lila sat by the piano, the sun setting outside casting warm hues across the room. The broken instrument had been repaired, its keys polished and its sound richer than ever. They played together, a duet of hope and resilience. Evelyn looked at her daughter and knew that whatever the future held, Lila had found her strength, not just in music, but in the courage to face the unseen battles and emerge victorious. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, both mother and daughter felt ready. The music teacher's broken piano had given birth to a story of transformation, and its melodies would continue to echo far beyond the walls of their small apartment in Millstone. The days grew longer as summer slowly warmed Millstone, but inside Evelyn's small apartment, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation and a quiet tension that neither mother nor daughter dared to speak aloud. The regional showcase had passed, and although Lila's performance had won her recognition, the future remained uncertain. The music program was still fragile, her mother's health precarious, and Lila's heart restless with dreams that seemed just out of reach. Yet beneath it all, a new spark flickered, a spark that would soon ignite into something extraordinary. It began with a phone call on a warm afternoon, the kind of call that changes everything in an instant. Evelyn had just returned from running errands when the ringing phone startled her. The voice on the other end belonged to a well-known Music Foundation director who had seen Lila's performance video online, shared by a friend who believed in her talent. The invitation was unexpected and thrilling, a full scholarship to attend an elite summer music program in New York City, an opportunity that could open doors to conservatories and professional stages far beyond Millstone's borders. Evelyn's hands trembled as she hung up, a mixture of joy and fear swirling within her. She looked at Lila, who was sitting quietly by the window, the soft afternoon light illuminating her thoughtful face. When Evelyn shared the news, Lila's eyes widened in disbelief. The possibility seemed like a dream too big to grasp, a path that would take her far from home and everything she knew. Yet, underneath the uncertainty, a fierce hope began to grow, stronger than the doubts that had held her captive for so long. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. There were forms to fill out, arrangements to be made, and the constant undercurrent of worry about Lila's mother's health, which remained fragile. Evelyn juggled hospital visits and work, trying to balance the demands of the present with the promise of a brighter future. Lila practiced relentlessly, determined to prove that she was worthy of the opportunity, but also afraid of what leaving might mean, leaving her mother, her community, the broken piano that had been both a refuge and a challenge. As the departure date neared, the weight of the decision pressed heavily on them. Evelyn feared losing the little stability they had left, while Lila wrestled with guilt and longing. Yet, in the quiet moments, they found strength in their shared love of music, the invisible thread that connected them across distance and time. On the morning of her departure, Millstone seemed to hold its breath. Neighbors and friends gathered to say goodbye, their faces a mix of pride and sorrow. The broken piano sat in a corner, its keys shining as if it too understood the significance of the moment. Lila carried her journal, her most treasured possession, a symbol of the story she had written with her own hands, a story of resilience, hope, and transformation. The journey to New York was a blur of new sights and sounds, overwhelming and exhilarating all at once. The city's towering buildings and endless streets were a stark contrast to Millstone's quiet familiarity. The elite program was demanding, filled with talented students from around the world, each with their own dreams and struggles. Lila felt like a small fish in a vast ocean, but Evelyn's words echoed in her mind, "You are enough. You belong." The program's first days were a test of endurance and heart. Early mornings and late nights blurred together as Lila immersed herself in practice and classes, guided by mentors who challenged her to dig deeper, to find her unique voice in the vast landscape of classical music. The broken piano of Millstone was replaced by grand instruments and concert halls, yet Lila carried with her the lessons learned on that old battered keyboard, that music is more than notes, it is the soul's language. Despite the intensity, moments of doubt still crept in. Lila struggled with homesickness and the pressure to perform flawlessly. Yet, every night before sleep, she opened her journal and wrote, a ritual that grounded her, reminding her of the journey that had brought her here and the people who believed in her. Evelyn's letters arrived regularly, filled with encouragement and updates about her mother, who was slowly stabilizing. These letters were lifelines, threads of love that kept Lila tethered to home. One evening, during a masterclass led by a renowned pianist, Lila was asked to perform a piece she had composed herself, a piece inspired by her life, her struggles, and her dreams. As her fingers touched the keys, she felt a surge of emotion. The music poured out raw and powerful, weaving a story of pain, hope, and triumph that silenced the room. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, but more importantly, Lila felt seen, truly seen, for the first time on a grand stage. That night, as she lay awake in the bustling dormitory, Lila realized that this unexpected invitation was not just a chance to grow as a musician but a turning point in her life. It was an affirmation that her story mattered, that the broken piano and the struggles of Millstone were threads woven into a larger tapestry of courage and possibility. Back home, Evelyn watched the seasons change from her small kitchen window, pride swelling in her heart. She knew the road ahead would still be difficult, that sacrifices were yet to come. But as she held the journal Lila had left behind, filled with music and dreams, she felt a quiet certainty, this was just the beginning. New York City was a relentless rhythm, a whirlwind of sounds and faces that never slowed for a moment. Lila found herself caught in the tide of the elite music program, a world so different from Millstone's quiet streets that it felt almost unreal. The grand halls and polished pianos dazzled her, but beneath the surface of opportunity lay a growing tide of doubt that threatened to swallow her whole. Every day was a battle to prove she belonged, to silence the whispering fears that she was an imposter among prodigies born into privilege and endless support. Lila practiced for hours, her fingers blistered and aching, yet no amount of repetition seemed to quiet the fear gnawing at her heart. She watched classmates glide effortlessly through complex compositions, their confidence shining like a spotlight on her insecurities. At night, the walls of her dorm room seemed to close in, a reminder of the distance between her and everything familiar. She longed for the warmth of home, the creak of the old piano bench, the comforting presence of her mother's steady faith. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling rehearsal, Lila sat alone in the student lounge, her head resting in her hands. The fatigue was more than physical. It was a heaviness that wrapped around her like a cloak, dulling the spark of hope she clung to. Just as despair threatened to take hold, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Hey, you're Lila, right? I'm Jamie." The newcomer was a boy with bright eyes and a genuine smile, carrying a battered violin case that looked like it had stories of its own. Jamie was different from the other students, easygoing, empathetic, someone who didn't judge by first impressions. Over the following days, he reached out, sharing his own struggles with self-doubt and the pressures of the program. He told Lila about growing up in a family where music was a birthright, and yet he often felt invisible beneath the shadow of expectations. Their conversations became a refuge, a place where both could be honest about fears and dreams without pretense. With Jamie's friendship came a new perspective. Lila began to see that she was not alone in feeling overwhelmed, that even those who seemed confident had their own battles. Slowly, the heavy cloak of doubt loosened, replaced by the steady warmth of companionship. Together, they practiced difficult pieces, exchanged critiques, and shared moments of laughter that reminded Lila of simpler times. One evening, Jamie invited Lila to a small gathering of students who met regularly to play music not for competitions or critiques, but for the pure joy of it. The room was filled with laughter, off-key notes, and the kind of messy harmony that felt like home. For the first time since arriving, Lila let go of the need to be perfect and allowed herself to simply play, her music flowing free and unguarded. That night, as she walked back to her dorm, Lila felt a lightness she hadn't known in months. The weight of expectations hadn't vanished, but with friendship beside her, it no longer felt insurmountable. She realized that the journey was not just about mastering music but about finding a place to belong, a place where her voice, flawed and beautiful, could be heard. Back in Millstone, Evelyn continued her fight to keep the music program alive, buoyed by stories of Lila's growth and the small victories that came with each scholarship and recital. She found comfort in knowing her daughter was building a new world for herself, one note at a time. Yet the ache of distance lingered, a quiet reminder of the sacrifices they both had made. As summer deepened, Lila's confidence grew, tempered by humility and the knowledge that the path ahead was still long. She wrote often in her journal, capturing not just her progress but the friendships, fears, and moments of joy that shaped her days. Each entry was a step toward understanding who she was beyond the music, a girl who had once been given a broken piano and a second chance. The unexpected invitation that brought her to New York had opened a door, but it was the people she met along the way who helped her walk through it. With every chord struck, every friendship forged, Lila moved closer to the truth that had been whispered to her all along: she belonged, not despite her struggles, but because of them. The summer days in New York flowed in a rhythm both exhilarating and exhausting. Lila's world had grown larger, filled with new faces, challenges, and discoveries, yet beneath the surface, a secret she had guarded since childhood began to stir, threatening to upend the fragile balance she had fought so hard to build. It started as a quiet ache during late-night practice sessions, a whisper of something left unsaid that pressed on her heart with increasing urgency. Lila had always been careful to keep her family's struggles private. The fragile health of her mother, the modest apartment in Millstone, the broken piano, all pieces of a puzzle she feared others might judge or misunderstand. To her new friends and teachers, she was a talented student with a determined spirit, not the girl from a world so different from the polished halls she now walked. But secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of surfacing when the weight becomes too great. One afternoon, after an intense masterclass, Lila returned to her dorm room to find a letter slipped under her door. The envelope was unmarked, and her name was written in careful, familiar handwriting. Hands trembling, she opened it to find a note from her mother, written in haste but filled with love and concern. Evelyn's words spoke of new health challenges, of hospital visits that were more frequent, and a decision they had made, a decision that would soon force Lila to confront the reality she had tried to avoid. The letter was a call for help, a plea for Lila to come home if she could, to be there for her mother when she needed her most. It was a moment of raw vulnerability, and as Lila read and reread the note, tears blurred the words. She had dreamed of this summer as a time to prove herself, to step fully into the world she had longed for, but now the dreams tangled with fears of loss and guilt. The next days were a whirlwind. Lila confided in Jamie, her closest friend, who listened without judgment and offered quiet support. Together, they talked through the possibilities, the difficult choices that lay ahead. The program director also stepped in, offering flexibility and resources to help Lila balance her responsibilities, but the decision ultimately rested with her. Could she stay and continue chasing the dream, or should she return home to the mother who had sacrificed so much for her? The night before she was to make her decision, Lila sat by the window overlooking the city skyline, the lights twinkling like distant stars. She opened her journal and began to write, pouring out her fears, hopes, and the love that bound her to Millstone. The words on the page were a mirror, reflecting the complexity of her heart and the truth she could no longer ignore. The next morning, with a heavy but resolute heart, Lila called Evelyn. Their conversation was tender and filled with the unspoken strength that had carried them through every hardship. Evelyn encouraged her daughter to follow her heart, reminding her that love and music were not about sacrifice alone but about connection and understanding. They made a plan. Lila would stay in New York for a little longer, while Evelyn arranged for additional care at home, a new chapter in their journey. With the secret now shared, Lila felt a shift inside her. The burden of silence lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. She threw herself into her music with a new intensity, each note a testament to the love and resilience that defined her life. The broken piano from Millstone was no longer just a symbol of hardship but a beacon of hope and perseverance. As the summer deepened, Lila's performances grew more confident, her compositions richer with emotion and experience. The friendships she had forged became pillars of strength, and the program's teachers recognized not just her talent but her courage. The secret she once feared had become a source of power, fueling her determination to make every moment count. Back in Millstone, Evelyn watched over the home and the music program with a quiet pride, knowing that despite the distance, the bond between mother and daughter was unbreakable. The letter that had started it all was a reminder that even when life's challenges seem overwhelming, love can light the darkest path. Lila's story was no longer just about a broken piano or a poor student. It was about the invisible battles fought with courage, the unyielding hope that carried her through, and the music that gave her a voice when words were not enough. The secret revealed was not a burden but a bridge, connecting two worlds and shaping the journey that lay ahead. The summer stretched on, each day packed with rehearsals, lessons, and moments that tested Lila's resolve. The city pulsed around her, a living, breathing entity that demanded everything she had. Despite the weight of her mother's condition and the distance that yawned between them, Lila found solace in the music that had become both her sanctuary and her battleground. Yet as the program's grand recital approached, a new kind of tension gripped her, a night of reckoning where all her hopes, fears, and sacrifices would come to a head. The recital was to be held in a renowned concert hall nestled in the heart of Manhattan, its ornate walls and polished stage a far cry from the humble school auditorium where Lila first played. For weeks, she had prepared a piece she composed herself, a haunting melody that told her story. The cracked keys of her broken piano, the quiet strength of her mother, the dreams that carried her beyond the limits of her small town. It was music that carried both sorrow and hope, a delicate balance she struggled to perfect. On the night of the recital, the air backstage was thick with nervous energy. Students dressed in elegant attire paced the halls, some practicing scales, others lost in silent meditation. Lila's hands were clammy, her heart pounding in a rhythm that echoed the opening notes of her piece. Jamie stood beside her, offering a steady smile and whispered encouragement, a reminder that she was not alone in this moment. As her name was called, Lila took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The bright lights washed over her, and for a fleeting second, the world narrowed to the piano in front of her, a gleaming grand, its keys smooth and promising. She settled onto the bench, the polished wood cool beneath her fingertips, and closed her eyes. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint rustle of the audience settling into their seats. Then, she began to play. The first notes spilled out tentative but soon grew into a flood of emotion, the music unfolding like a story told without words. Every phrase was a brushstroke, painting the journey from the broken piano in Millstone to this grand stage, from doubt to courage, from separation to connection. Her fingers moved with a mixture of precision and passion, capturing the rawness of her struggles and the shimmering thread of hope woven through them. The audience sat spellbound, the usual distractions fading as the music carried them into Lila's world. She could feel their breath, their silent support mingling with the notes, a shared understanding that transcended language. And in that moment, all the late nights, the tears, the fears, they crystallized into something beautiful and true. But just as the music reached its peak, a sudden sharp sound interrupted the flow, a key stuck beneath her finger, jarring and discordant. Lila froze, her heart skipping a beat as the imperfect note echoed through the hall. Panic threatened to consume her, the shadow of the broken piano lurking in the background of her mind. For a second, the dream seemed to falter. Then, she remembered. The broken piano back home, the countless hours of practice on imperfect keys, the faith her mother had in her. She took a deep breath, steadied her hands, and continued, turning the flaw into a feature, a deliberate, poignant note that deepened the emotion instead of breaking it. The music swelled once more, richer and more compelling than before. When the last note faded into silence, the hall erupted in applause. Lila stood, her chest heaving, eyes shining with tears. The moment was a triumph not just of talent but of resilience, a testament to the power of persistence and love. Backstage, Jamie was the first to congratulate her, his grin wide and genuine. Teachers and fellow students gathered, offering praise and admiration, but Lila's thoughts were already with her mother, with the broken piano that had started it all, with the journey that had brought her here. That night, as she sat alone in her dorm room, Lila opened her journal and wrote not of her success but of the lessons learned, that imperfection could be strength, that vulnerability was courage, and that music was the language of the heart, uniting us all. The night of reckoning had passed, but it was only a beginning, a door opened onto a future that was hers to shape. The applause still echoed in Lila's ears days after the recital, a distant yet persistent reminder of a night that had shifted everything. The glow of accomplishment warmed her, but beneath it stirred the lingering shadows of her past, ghosts she thought she had left behind in Millstone. As the city's relentless pace surged forward, Lila found herself wrestling with memories and questions that threatened to pull her back into old fears. One afternoon, while sorting through her belongings in the dorm's cramped closet, she discovered an old photograph tucked between the pages of a forgotten music book. It was a picture of her mother, young and radiant, standing beside a piano that looked remarkably like the broken one in Millstone. Behind them was a man, her father, whom Lila hadn't seen since she was a toddler. The sight hit her like a thunderclap, reopening a door she had kept firmly shut. Her father's absence was a silence that had shaped much of her life. Evelyn rarely spoke of him, and Lila had learned to fill the gaps with her own stories, often casting him as a shadowy figure who abandoned them both. But now, faced with the photograph's unspoken questions, she realized how little she truly knew. What had happened? Why had he left? And most painfully, could she ever reconcile the fractured pieces of her family? The discovery unsettled her, yet it sparked a fierce determination. Lila was no longer content to live only in the present, ignoring the roots that had anchored her. She began to ask questions, tentative at first, reaching out to her mother through late-night calls that grew longer and more honest. Evelyn's voice, usually steady and strong, faltered as she revealed fragments of a past marked by love, loss, and difficult choices. Her father had been a passionate musician, a gifted pianist who once dreamed of concert halls far grander than the small town where they lived. But life had pulled him in different directions, circumstances, mistakes, and regrets tangled together until he vanished from their lives without explanation. Evelyn had raised Lila alone, pouring all her strength into giving her daughter the opportunities she never had. The broken piano was a relic of happier times, a reminder of dreams deferred but never forgotten. As the story unfolded, Lila's feelings were a storm of anger, sadness, and a fragile hope. She wondered if forgiveness was possible, if the man in the photograph was still out there somewhere, carrying his own burdens. The thought of reaching out to him terrified her but also offered a glimmer of healing. Meanwhile, her schoolwork and practice sessions became infused with a new intensity, as if the music itself could bridge the gaps left by absence. Her compositions grew deeper, weaving in themes of loss and reconciliation, of searching for connection amid uncertainty. Her teachers noticed the change, remarking on the emotional maturity that seemed to emerge almost overnight. One evening, Jamie noticed Lila's distant gaze as they walked through Central Park, the city lights shimmering on the water's surface. "You've been quiet lately," he said gently. "What's on your mind?" Lila hesitated, then shared the story of the photograph and the questions it raised. Jamie listened with quiet understanding, his support unwavering. "Sometimes, the past isn't something we can fix right away," he said, "but knowing the truth, even a little bit, can set us free." His words struck a chord. Lila realized that her journey was no longer just about mastering music or overcoming hardship, it was about embracing all parts of herself, even the painful ones. The shadows from her past would always be there, but they no longer had to define her. With renewed resolve, Lila drafted a letter she hesitated to send, a message to the father she barely remembered but longed to understand. She didn't know what would come next, whether she would find answers or more questions, but she knew she had to try. As the city buzzed outside her window, Lila sat at the piano and began to play a new melody, a song of hope threaded through uncertainty, a testament to the power of facing the past to create a future. The broken keys might never be fully restored, but in the music, she found the courage to heal and grow. The letter rested on Lila's desk for 3 days before she finally found the courage to send it. Each time she reached for it, doubt crept in, whispering fears of rejection, silence, or worse, shattering whatever fragile hope had begun to grow inside her. But the ache of unanswered questions was stronger than her fears. With a trembling hand, she folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and dropped it into the campus mailbox. The days that followed were a mix of restless anticipation and distracting routines. Lila threw herself into her studies and practice, but every spare moment was shadowed by the thought of the letter, drifting across unknown miles to an uncertain destination. She imagined the man reading her words, her voice across time and space, wondering if he would remember her, if he would answer, if he even wanted to. Then, one late afternoon, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. Heart pounding, she answered. "Lila? It's David." The voice was hesitant, unfamiliar yet strangely familiar, stirring memories she barely knew she had. "Your father." The world seemed to tilt, words catching in her throat. She struggled to speak, to fill the silence that stretched between them, heavy with years of absence. David's voice was rough around the edges, worn by time and regret. He spoke cautiously at first, asking questions, sharing fragments of his own story, the reasons he left, the mistakes he made, the pain he never wanted her to feel. Lila listened, tears streaming down her cheeks as walls she'd built crumbled. The man on the other end was flawed and distant, but he was hers, a part of her story she could no longer deny. The conversation stretched for hours, a mixture of apologies, questions, and cautious hope. He wanted to meet. She did too. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Arrangements were made, trips planned, and nerves bristled beneath the surface of every encounter. Lila's friends and teachers rallied around her, offering encouragement and a steady presence as she prepared for a meeting that would change everything. When the day came, Lila found herself standing in a quiet cafe, the hum of city life around her dimming beneath the pounding of her heart. David arrived moments later, older and softer than the man in the photo, his eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. They sat, two strangers connected by blood and history, bridging the chasm of years with tentative words and shared silences. The conversation was awkward at times, filled with pauses and stumbles, but beneath it grew a fragile bond, a beginning rather than an end. David spoke of regrets, of missed opportunities, but also of love that had never faded. Lila shared her journey, the broken piano, her mother's sacrifices, the music that had shaped her life. Each word wove them closer, healing wounds that had long been left to fester in silence. In the weeks after their meeting, letters turned into phone calls, and phone calls into visits. David's presence was imperfect, filled with both warmth and the weight of what had been lost, but it was real, and for the first time in a long time, Lila felt whole in a way she never had before. Her music deepened with the experience, each composition a tapestry of reconciliation and hope. She no longer played just for herself or her mother, but for the family she was rebuilding piece by piece. The broken piano in Millstone was no longer a symbol of what was missing but a reminder of what could still be restored. The journey was far from over. There would be challenges and setbacks, moments of doubt and pain. But as Lila stood at the threshold of this new chapter, she carried with her the knowledge that healing was possible, that love could bridge even the widest divides, and that the music within her was stronger than any silence. The reunion with her father had stirred emotions in Lila that she hadn't anticipated. The mixture of relief, confusion, and cautious hope settled into a strange kind of tension inside her. She knew that forgiveness wasn't something she could force, it had to come naturally, one step at a time. But every interaction with David chipped away at the walls she had built around her heart. Back at school, the days grew busier with upcoming performances and final projects, yet Lila found herself more distracted than ever. Her mind was often miles away, replaying conversations with her father, questioning what forgiveness really meant. Was it forgetting? Was it excusing? Or was it something deeper, a gift she could give herself more than anyone else? One afternoon, while practicing in the school's practice room, her piano teacher, Mrs. Whitman, noticed the unusual heaviness in Lila's playing. "Your music sounds different lately," she said softly after the last note faded. "More vulnerable. More honest." Lila looked up, surprised. "I guess I've been going through some things." Mrs. Whitman smiled knowingly. "Music has a way of revealing what words sometimes can't. Have you considered composing something about this journey you're on?" That suggestion sparked something in Lila. That night, she sat at her piano with a fresh determination. The notes she played were hesitant at first, searching for the right expression. Slowly, the melody emerged, a gentle, haunting tune that spoke of brokenness and healing, sorrow and hope intertwined. It was a melody of forgiveness, imperfect but sincere. As the days passed, Lila shared the piece with David during one of his visits. They sat together in the living room of her tiny apartment, the piano filling the room with the bittersweet song. Her father listened intently, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. When the last note faded, he reached out and took her hand. "This is beautiful," he said quietly. "It's everything I've felt but never knew how to say." The music became their language, a bridge connecting past wounds with a hopeful future. For Lila, forgiveness wasn't about erasing the pain but acknowledging it, embracing the complexities of love and loss. It was about opening her heart, not just to her father but to herself. Meanwhile, her mother, Evelyn, watched the growing relationship with a mix of caution and relief. She had fought hard to protect Lila from disappointment, but she also recognized the healing power of truth and reconciliation. Slowly, she began to soften, allowing the walls she'd built to crumble just enough to welcome David back into their lives. School continued with its own pressures, but Lila's newfound emotional clarity gave her strength. She performed with a depth and confidence that stunned her teachers and peers alike. Her music no longer hid behind technical perfection but shone with raw, authentic feeling. She was no longer just a student chasing a dream, she was an artist telling her own story. The semester's end brought a major recital, and Lila was chosen to perform her composition of forgiveness. The night of the performance, the concert hall was packed. Evelyn sat in the front row, tears shining in her eyes, while David watched from a seat nearby, his expression a mixture of pride and humility. As Lila took the stage and played, the audience was swept away by the powerful emotion in every note. The melody carried them through a journey of heartbreak and healing, and when the final chord rang out, the silence was profound. Then, applause erupted, thunderous and heartfelt. Backstage, Lila found herself surrounded by friends, teachers, and family. Jamie hugged her tightly, whispering, "You did it. You really did." Her mother smiled through tears, and David's eyes shone with gratitude. In that moment, Lila felt a deep peace settle within her. The melody of forgiveness had become more than music, it was a symbol of transformation, a testament to the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. As the night drew to a close, Lila sat at the piano one last time, playing a soft, reflective tune that echoed the quiet hope she carried forward. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, she felt ready to face whatever came next, knowing she was no longer alone. The spring air was fresh with promise as Lila stepped onto the campus grounds, the buzz of new beginnings mingling with the weight of unfinished stories. The past months had brought so much change, reunions, forgiveness, and a deepening of her musical voice, but the future still held uncertainties. The scholarship competition was approaching, and with it, the possibility of a life-changing opportunity. Yet, beneath the excitement, Lila sensed the lingering shadows of her old struggles creeping back. Her father's presence had become a steady part of her life, but their relationship was still fragile, like the first tentative notes of a new melody waiting to find harmony. Sometimes, old doubts whispered in the silence between them, and Lila worried about the strength of their fragile connection. Would forgiveness be enough? Could they build something lasting after so many years apart? At the same time, her mother's cautious approval was tempered by protective instincts. Evelyn wanted to believe in the possibility of healing but remained wary, often reminding Lila to stay grounded and focused on her goals. Music will take you far, she'd say, but don't lose yourself in the past. Lila nodded, torn between honoring her mother's wisdom and embracing the new chapters unfolding around her. She found solace in Jamie, whose unwavering support grounded her amid the swirling emotions. Together, they practiced for the competition, sharing dreams and fears late into the evenings. The scholarship competition was a prestigious event, attracting talented students from across the country. For Lila, it was more than just a contest, it was a chance to prove to herself and others that her journey, marked by broken pianos and fractured families, could lead to something beautiful. The night before the competition, she sat at her piano, fingers trembling over the keys, wondering if she was truly ready. In the quiet of her room, Lila thought back to the broken piano that had started it all, the symbol of loss that had transformed into a beacon of hope. She played the melody of forgiveness once more, letting the notes carry away her doubts and fears. The music was no longer just her story, it was a shared testament to resilience and love. On the day of the competition, the concert hall was grand and intimidating. Lila's heart raced as she waited backstage, the hum of the audience washing over her. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage with a mixture of nerves and determination. The spotlight was bright, but her music was brighter still. As she played, the room fell silent, captivated by the emotion pouring from her fingertips. The judges watched intently, but Lila played not for them, nor for the applause, but for the journey that had brought her here, the struggles, the forgiveness, the newfound connections. Each note was a step toward healing and hope. When the final chord lingered in the air, the audience erupted in applause. Tears streamed down Lila's face as she took her bow, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. The result wasn't yet announced, but she knew she had already won something far greater. A sense of belonging and purpose. In the days that followed, Lila balanced excitement with uncertainty. The competition results were to be revealed at a formal ceremony, but before then, she faced another unexpected challenge. An email arrived from a renowned music producer interested in her work, offering an opportunity to record a demo. It was a chance that could change everything but also meant stepping into a world far removed from the quiet comfort of her music room. Lila wrestled with the decision, torn between the security of her studies and the allure of a new path. Jamie encouraged her to seize the moment, reminding her that growth often came from stepping outside one's comfort zone. Evelyn offered cautious support, emphasizing the importance of staying true to herself. Amid these crossroads, Lila's father shared his own struggles, revealing that he was battling health issues that threatened to pull him back into the shadows. The news was a stark reminder of life's fragility and the need to cherish every moment. In response, Lila found a renewed strength, realizing that the music, and the relationships she had fought so hard to rebuild, were her true anchors. She decided to accept the producer's offer, embracing the uncertainty as part of her evolving story. As spring gave way to summer, Lila stepped forward into new horizons, carrying with her the lessons of forgiveness and resilience. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with both promise and challenge, but she no longer faced it alone. The broken piano, the letter to her father, the melodies of healing, they were all threads woven into the fabric of her life. With a final glance at the city skyline, Lila felt a quiet confidence settle within her. Whatever came next, she was ready to play her part, to compose her own future, note by note, heart by heart. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the studio's large windows, casting warm glows on the polished equipment and gleaming instruments arranged meticulously around the room. Lila sat quietly on a plush leather couch, her hands resting lightly on her lap, heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nerves. The studio smelled faintly of polished wood and cables, the kind of place she'd only dreamed of being in. Today was her first recording session, a milestone she never thought possible back when she was playing on that broken piano in Millstone. David had called the night before to offer encouragement, his voice steady despite the tremors of his own health concerns. "Remember, Lila, this is your music, your story. Let it flow freely, and the rest will follow." His words lingered in her mind, a steady pulse beneath the swirl of emotions. Evelyn had come by early that morning, squeezing Lila's hands tightly. "You've come so far, baby. No matter what happens today, I'm proud of you." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, a rare crack in the armor she had worn since Lila's childhood. Jamie was already in the studio, tuning a guitar and offering quiet smiles of support. "You've got this," he said simply. "Just be yourself." Lila nodded, her fingers brushing the keys of the upright piano in the corner, a reminder of her roots. The producer, a tall man named Marcus, approached with a warm smile and an easy confidence that put her at some ease. "Ready to make some magic?" As the microphones were set up and sound checks began, Lila felt the familiar nerves settle deeper into excitement. This was a new chapter, a chance to share her music with the world beyond her small circle of family and friends. When the moment came to record, Lila closed her eyes and let the music flow from her soul. The melody she played was the one she had composed during the months of reconciliation, the one that told her story of forgiveness and hope. Each note was infused with all the pain, love, and healing she'd experienced. The room seemed to hold its breath as she played, and when the last chord faded, there was a silence heavy with emotion. Marcus's eyes shone with admiration. "That was incredible. You don't just play notes, you tell a story." They spent hours working on different takes, tweaking and refining. Lila found herself relaxing into the process, discovering new layers in her music as Marcus encouraged her to experiment with phrasing and dynamics. Jamie's gentle guitar harmonies added warmth to the recordings, creating a rich tapestry of sound. Between takes, Lila called her mother and David, sharing bits of the experience and hearing their pride and excitement. The connection she'd rebuilt with them made the triumph feel even sweeter. It was no longer just her achievement but theirs as well. As the session wrapped up late that afternoon, Marcus leaned back, clearly impressed. "We're going to do great things with this. The world needs to hear your story." Walking out into the cool evening air, Lila felt a sense of accomplishment and possibility she'd never known before. The path ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges she could not yet foresee, but for the first time, she believed in her own power to shape her future. That night, as she lay in bed, the melodies she'd recorded echoed softly in her mind. The broken piano was no longer a symbol of loss but the first note in a symphony of hope, one she was composing with every breath she took. The days following the recording session buzzed with a new energy that Lila hadn't felt in years. Messages of encouragement from friends and teachers poured in, and the small clip Marcus shared on social media began to gather attention. For a moment, it felt like everything was finally falling into place. Yet, beneath the excitement, a quiet shadow lingered, an old, familiar voice inside her that whispered doubt and fear. Lila found herself awake late at night, staring at the ceiling as questions swirled in her mind. Was she really ready for this? Could she live up to the expectations now placed on her? What if the world didn't accept her music the way she hoped? The thrill of possibility was intertwined with a paralyzing fear of failure. One afternoon, while practicing in the music room, she noticed a small crack forming in one of the piano keys. It wasn't just the piano, it felt like a metaphor for her own fragile confidence. The room, once a sanctuary, seemed to close in around her. Tears welled up unbidden, the pressure threatening to overwhelm. Jamie found her there, the sorrow in her eyes pulling him in without words. He sat beside her, offering quiet presence. "You're not alone," he said softly. "We all have doubts, but you have something special. Don't let fear silence your music." His words were balm to her frayed spirit, but the internal battle raged on. Lila realized that the journey wasn't just about external success, it was about conquering the fears rooted deep within her. Meanwhile, David's health took a sudden downturn. A hospital visit shook Lila to her core, reminding her of life's fragility and the weight of the past she'd been trying to move beyond. Sitting by his bedside, holding his hand, she felt a surge of determination. This was more than music, it was about healing family, embracing imperfections, and cherishing every moment. At the same time, Evelyn struggled with her own fears. Watching Lila step into the spotlight brought pride but also anxiety. She worried about the pressures that might crush her daughter or cause her to lose sight of who she was. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Evelyn confessed her worries to Lila, leading to a heartfelt conversation that strengthened their bond. "You don't have to be perfect," Evelyn said. "Just be true to yourself." That became Lila's mantra as she faced the next phase of her journey. She learned to embrace her doubts as part of the process, allowing them to fuel rather than freeze her. With each practice session, each interaction, she grew more confident in her voice and vision. The shadow of fear remained, but it no longer controlled her. Instead, it became a quiet companion, a reminder of how far she'd come and how much further she could go. The day of the big announcement arrived with a crispness in the air that matched the nervous energy pulsing through Lila's veins. She stood backstage at the city's grand concert hall, the same place where she had first performed publicly, but now everything felt heavier, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for her to step forward and claim her place. She glanced around the backstage area, catching sight of familiar faces. Teachers who had supported her, friends who had cheered her on, and most importantly, her mother and father, sitting side by side in the front row. Their presence steadied her, reminding her of the long journey that had brought her here, the broken piano, the years of struggle, the painful but necessary forgiveness that had reshaped her life. Jamie caught her eye and gave her a reassuring nod. "No matter what happens, you're already a winner," he whispered. Lila took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. The competition's results would determine more than just a scholarship, they would signal the beginning of a new chapter, or the closing of a door she'd fought so hard to open. The host stepped onto the stage, the room falling silent. Names were read aloud, honorable mentions, runners-up, the tension building with every passing second. When the grand prize was finally announced, it was Lila's name that echoed through the hall. The applause was thunderous, washing over her like a wave of validation and relief. As she walked to the stage to accept the award, tears pricked her eyes. This wasn't just about recognition, it was about the resilience, the growth, the healing that had been hidden in every note she'd played. On stage, she glanced toward her parents, seeing their proud smiles, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. In the days that followed, Lila's world shifted in unexpected ways. The scholarship opened doors to new opportunities, advanced lessons, recording contracts, and invitations to perform at prestigious events. But with these gifts came new challenges, the pressure to succeed, the fear of losing herself in the spotlight, and the lingering doubts that sometimes threatened to resurface. One evening, after a long rehearsal, Lila sat alone at the piano, fingers tracing the familiar keys. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. She thought about everything she'd endured, the broken piano, her father's absence and return, the complicated love of her mother, and the unwavering support of friends like Jamie. Music had been her refuge and her voice, the thread connecting her past, present, and future. In that quiet moment, she realized that success wasn't just about applause or awards, it was about staying true to her story, embracing imperfections, and sharing her heart through every melody. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, she felt ready, not just as a musician, but as a young woman shaped by love, loss, forgiveness, and hope. The sun rose gently over Millstone, casting a golden glow across the familiar streets that had witnessed so much of Lila's story. Standing by the window of her small apartment, she watched the world wake up, a rhythm as constant and hopeful as the music that had carried her through the years. Today was different. Today felt like the beginning of something new, not just another step, but a turning point shaped by every struggle and triumph that had led her here. Lila's fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of the old piano key necklace Jamie had given her, a symbol of their shared journey, of brokenness made beautiful. It reminded her how far she'd come since the day Mrs. Harper handed her that battered piano, a gift she hadn't thought she deserved. That moment had set everything in motion. The music, the pain, the healing, the love she had rediscovered in her family and friends. The broken piano was no longer a symbol of loss but the very foundation of her dreams. Her phone buzzed softly, a message from Marcus confirming the next steps for the recording project that had blossomed from her first session. The opportunity to share her music with a wider audience was no longer a distant hope but an unfolding reality. Yet, despite the excitement, Lila knew this wasn't just about fame or success. It was about telling a story, her story, with honesty and heart. As she prepared for the day, the memories of the past mingled with the promise of the future. The hurt she had carried, the silence she had endured, and the courage it took to forgive her father and herself all lived within her music. Each note was a testament to resilience, a beacon for anyone who had ever felt broken or alone. David's health had stabilized, and their relationship, though still tender, was rooted in understanding and newfound respect. Evelyn's cautious optimism had blossomed into pride, and the love between mother and daughter grew stronger, built on truth and acceptance. Jamie remained her steadfast companion, a reminder that love could be patient and true. Lila stepped outside into the soft morning light, the city humming with possibility. She carried with her a quiet confidence, a trust in the path she was creating, forged through hardship and hope. Walking to the community center where she often volunteered, she paused by the old upright piano in the corner, a relic from her past and a symbol of her journey. Sitting down, she let her fingers find the keys naturally, the melody flowing like a conversation between her past and future. As she played, the room filled with warmth and light, and she felt a profound peace settle over her. This was home. This was where she belonged. Later that afternoon, Lila met with Marcus and Jamie to discuss the next phase of her music career. They talked excitedly about new songs, upcoming performances, and the impact she could make with her voice. But amid the plans and possibilities, Lila's heart remained anchored in the lessons she had learned, the importance of authenticity, resilience, and love. In a quiet moment, she reflected on the letter she had written to her father all those months ago, the one that had started their journey toward healing. Forgiveness had opened doors she hadn't dared to knock on before, and the music had given her the courage to walk through them. It wasn't a perfect ending, life rarely was, but it was a new beginning, full of promise and grace. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lila stood on the stage of the community concert hall, the same place where she had once nervously played her first recital. Now, the spotlight felt different, not a source of fear but a celebration of all she had overcome. With the audience waiting, Lila closed her eyes and let the music pour from her soul. The notes carried stories of broken pianos, silent tears, healing hearts, and unbreakable hope. As her fingers danced across the keys, she realized that this was more than a performance, it was a gift. A gift to herself, to her family, and to everyone who needed to believe that from brokenness, something beautiful could rise. When the final chord faded, the applause was not just for the music, but for the journey it represented. Lila smiled through tears, knowing that while this chapter was closing, the story she was writing had only just begun. The music teacher who once gave a broken piano to a poor student had not just sparked a beginning, she had ignited a flame that would burn brightly for a lifetime. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The tour bus hummed steadily along the highway, carrying Lila and her small but dedicated team toward their next city. The lights of passing towns flickered past the windows like distant stars, each one a reminder of the journey she had embarked upon, one that felt both exhilarating and overwhelming. After the whirlwind success of her debut album, life had changed dramatically, thrusting her into a world she had only dreamed of. Yet with every new opportunity came fresh challenges she hadn't anticipated. Lila sat quietly, her guitar case resting against the seat beside her, thoughts swirling in the dim glow of the bus interior. The applause, the interviews, the late-night performances, it was everything she had worked for, but also a heavy weight on her shoulders. The pressure to keep creating, to stay authentic while appealing to a growing fan base, gnawed at her. She remembered the broken piano in that old community center, the first notes she had played as a frightened girl with nothing but hope. That piano had been more than an instrument. It was a symbol of perseverance, a reminder that beauty could emerge from imperfection. Now, as she traveled from city to city, she held on to that lesson fiercely. Her manager, Claire, slid into the seat beside her, sensing the quiet storm behind Lila's calm exterior. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. Lila shrugged, managing a small smile. "It's a lot to take in. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a role instead of just being me." Claire nodded knowingly. "That's normal. Fame changes the game, but you don't have to lose yourself in it. Remember why you started." That night, after a sold-out show filled with roaring fans and bright stage lights, Lila retreated to her hotel room, the quiet sanctuary she desperately needed. Alone with her thoughts, she felt the familiar tug of doubt creep in. Was this really what she wanted? Could she balance the demands of her career with the person she wanted to be? Her phone buzzed with a message from Jamie. "Thinking about you. Don't forget to breathe." His simple words grounded her. Jamie had been there through every twist and turn, a constant in the chaos. Their friendship had blossomed into something deeper, a tender connection that gave her strength beyond the spotlight. The next morning, Lila woke early and sat at the hotel's small piano, fingers tracing tentative chords. Music was still her refuge, the place where her true self lived, unfiltered and free. As she played, the melody unfolded, raw and honest, echoing the doubts and hopes tangled inside her. Over the following weeks, Lila faced moments that tested her resolve. The relentless schedule left her exhausted, and the glare of public scrutiny exposed her vulnerabilities. A harsh review shook her confidence, and a conflict with a producer over creative direction forced her to confront the cost of compromise. Yet, through it all, she found unexpected allies. Fellow musicians who understood the struggle, fans whose stories of resilience mirrored her own, and her family, who reminded her daily of the roots that grounded her. Evelyn's pride was unwavering, David's health stabilized with renewed hope, and Jamie's steady presence became a beacon. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling rehearsal, Lila sat down with Claire and Jamie to reflect. "I want my music to mean something real," she said firmly. "Not just hits and charts, but stories that heal and inspire." Jamie smiled. "That's exactly what you've always done. Don't let the noise drown out your voice." They decided to take a break from the hectic tour to write new songs, songs that spoke to growth, vulnerability, and the journey beyond success. Lila poured her heart into the music, channeling every fear and dream into lyrics and melodies that felt authentic and powerful. Months later, as she debuted her new material at a small, intimate venue, the response was electric but different, quieter, more personal. Fans connected deeply, sharing tears and smiles, finding their own stories in her songs. Standing on that modest stage, far from the bright lights of large arenas, Lila felt a profound sense of peace. She realized that success wasn't about the size of the crowd or the number of awards, it was about staying true to herself, embracing every challenge, and continuing to grow. Her journey had begun with a broken piano and a simple act of kindness from a music teacher. Now, as an artist and a woman, Lila understood that life's beauty lay not in perfection but in the courage to face each new chapter with an open heart. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, she was ready, not just to play the notes, but to write her own symphony.